Okay, did the YouTube...
It started recording, Hocam. We can start.
Okay. What about YouTube sharing? Are you going to share also?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. I think just about two weeks ago, I promised that I would be talking about the concept of science in a holistic approach. But you can see that says integrative approach. And then why in philosophy of science? Because this subject that we study is actually, something that is discussed in philosophy of science. So that is why I gave this title for my talk today, Integrative Approach in Philosophy of Science. Now, if we mean holistic approach, why am I saying integrative? Just use the holistic approach in sciences or holistic approach to sciences. This is because, for the past so many decades, sciences are taken in a discrete way, namely, separate from each other, and especially they cut off certain sciences from the others, and then the definitions that they give also paying attention to only certain sciences, but not giving a definition that will integrate all the sciences into a general scientific scheme or system of sciences. So that is why I said maybe we should start this integrative. And as you already know, that Nursi Society established an institute called Institute of Integrative Knowledge. So that is why I preferred this title. But then let me give some more explanation what we mean by integrative approach. Mainly, we mean approaching something in order to make it a part of a system. So that means if there is something that is cut off from the main system to which it belongs, we would like to reintegrate and bring that thing into the same system again. And as such, this approach is the opposite of discrete approach, taking sciences individually, one by themselves. So I just changed my slide. I hope you are seeing the second slide now, which begins with what is integrative approach. Is that correct?
No, Hocam, we only see the first slide.
Okay, that means I will restart again. Hopefully this time it will do you see the slide now?
It says, yes, Hocam, now we are in the slides. It's full screen.
Okay. Yeah, so in that case, in the integrative approach, there are two things mainly: that which is integrated and that into which the integration took place or takes place, which is the complete system actually. Now I changed my slide again. Do you see the next slide?
No. Yes.
Okay, so that starts with discrete approach. So discrete approach means to consider things as independent of other parts within the system. So in that case, with an integrative approach, every individual science is made a part, namely a member of the system of sciences. Now, in that case, in our endeavor, that which is integrated is an individual science, and that into which the integration takes place is the complete system of sciences. Now, I would like to show this with some animation. What we are studying or investigating in science is actually something that is real. And usually we have a concept to express that which is real. We refer to it as being. Now, being is, again, something that is very general. Now, as such, there is no, there is not a specific science that is studying being, but we say that, that which studies being is actually the whole complete system of the sciences, a system of sciences. So there is one being, and there is the system that studies that being. Now, on the other hand, when we consider being, we know that it has so many different manifestations. For instance, the one that we may see is inorganic being, things that are inorganic, and these are obviously studied in physical sciences. And then, of course, this is a very general name, referring to many sciences that may be classified under physics. In the past, of course, today classification is a little bit different. However, I would like to, change the concepts slightly so that we can understand, this what we mean by this integrative approach. If you like, instead of physics, you can say natural sciences, because that is what I mean, natural sciences. Okay, so then obviously there will be organic beings that are living beings, in other words, and there will be obviously a science which corresponds to that. But that science we know is named biology. So in general sense, if we consider being in this way, there can be only two sciences which belong to the system of sciences, inorganic and organic. So therefore, if you want, we can change our concepts. We can say natural sciences, life sciences, general like that. And then, of course, there will be sub branches, because there is also sub branches of being, inorganic being and organic being. So they have sub branches. However, there is another, manifestation of being, and that is human social organization. So human social organization, we can refer to this as social existence. And therefore, there should be another, class of sciences that will be studying these social sciences. We can refer to these again with a general name, social and human sciences. So therefore, integration is, to consider these three very general classes of sciences, namely natural, life sciences, social and human sciences. We can even reduce this, it's not good, but if we want to use just one concept, we can say, social sciences, or simple, again, human sciences. So this approach is based on a certain epistemology. And in fact, in all sciences, scientists, they use a certain epistemology whenever they are engaged in their scientific activities. I would like to explain this very briefly. In the first place, epistemology itself, epistemology in a general sense. I usually refer to this as pure epistemology. And as such, this is a branch of philosophy. It is concerned with knowledge processes. So knowledge processes, namely, when we acquire knowledge about something, the processes that take place internally and externally. Now, external processes are, for instance, when I want to learn, about inorganic beings, I can go to the library and try to find books. If I don't understand, I can go and ask a professor if he knows to explain, or I can take courses, register for a course and learn. So these are, acquiring knowledge as external processes, things that take place outside my body, in other words. But you see, there is a specific science which is concerned with this. As you know, this is education. But pure epistemology is not concerned with that. It's concerned with the internal processes. Namely, when I want to learn about inorganic being, what kind of frameworks am I utilizing in my mind? This is the question. And what kind of processes are taking place in my faculties of knowledge? So this is pure epistemology, general epistemology, and the explanation of this is usually called theory of knowledge. And this is again a branch of philosophy. It is studied in that branch. But today, because there is, also in biology or neuroscience, some scientists, they claim that, this kind of process is only physical, and therefore there is no need to study this in philosophy. We can study this, in biology or other related sciences. So as a result, they try to explain this completely physically. But usually we argue that this is not possible, because there are so many knowledge processes that is taking place in us, and it's too difficult. It's perhaps impossible to explain with physical processes alone. And therefore, we say that there is a knowledge system that we utilize when we try to acquire knowledge in this way. But this is, again, pure epistemology. We are not concerned with that either. We are concerned with the application of that pure epistemology into scientific activities. So therefore, this will be called epistemology of science. And as such, it is applied epistemology. It is trying to discover the mental frameworks that a scientist utilizing in his scientific activities. But how can we discover these mental frameworks that a scientist is utilizing? These are important for many reasons, actually, that I will try to explain as we go on. I would like to suggest an analogy that we should use in order to discover or decipher these mental frameworks that a scientist is utilizing. Now, when I give my analogy, I know some questions may arise, in your minds, that you might think that, when I am doing my scientific activities, how come I am not aware of these and I don't even utilize these things? Our bodily systems, they resemble each other. Like our knowledge system resembles our digestive system. As you know, when we eat something, there are so many things that are taking place in our digestive system, and we are not even aware of this. For instance, the stomach excretes certain hormones, acids, and things like that. And the gallbladder and the liver, they all, they do their works, and we are not aware of this. And all these things take place because of the nature, as they are saying. I'm sorry, I have to use this term, but that is not what we mean actually. But just in order to make my analogy related to what I am trying to explain, I have to utilize certain things. So as a result, what we eat is digested on the basis of the nature of the digestive system. Now, the same thing with regard to our knowledge system. There is one difference, is this, that our consciousness is perhaps more active when we are learning, when we are acquiring knowledge. Whereas in case of digestive system, it is not so much active. And because of this, probably some of our friends may raise this question. On the other hand, we are conscious of acquiring knowledge, but we are not really conscious of how our knowledge system is working, taking place. So let me try to explain this. For instance, there is a very beautiful scenery, and we like this scenery, and we would like to ask a painter to paint this scenery for us. And he comes, as you see. When he looks, he first tries to find the best place for himself, from which the scenery looks the best. So obviously, the place that he looks at the scenery will be his perspective. So from that perspective, he will try to paint this picture. And obviously, this will be his first framework. So the first framework that the painter is utilizing is the place that where he stands. Now, but you see, as you can see, he has a canvas, and his canvas is very small. But look at the picture. The picture the scenery has no limits. It's right in front of him. Since he's going to depict the scenery into this limited place, he has to choose a frame for himself. A frame, then he will say, okay, now I am going to paint this frame. As you can see, it shows here. So this is the second thing. After this, he says, now I am ready to start my painting. So already he has arranged for himself two frameworks. First, perspective. Second, the frame. And the frame he chooses obviously according to his canvas. Not only that, there are certain other things that are determined by his perspective. He can choose the perspective a little bit below, or right way, left way. So how did he decide to choose this frame? Obviously, this frame is chosen according to the perspective, because from this perspective, this frame looks the best. And therefore, this will be the most beautiful way he can paint on his canvas. All this obviously depends on his decision. Now, when he starts painting, he will have to utilize another framework, actually. And what is that framework? That framework is his perception of beauty, his perception of light, color, art, and so on. So he will paint according to that. He may not exactly paint the color as he sees here, because he thinks on the canvas, obviously in nature it looks beautiful, but on canvas it may not look beautiful. He may slightly, put light, color, change, dark, and so on. So as a result, this is his outlook. So then he starts painting and he completes. So what I am saying is that a painter is utilizing primarily three perspectives. What a scientist is doing is more or less the same as the painter. A scientist looks at a problem or something and he tries to paint it, except he doesn't have a canvas. He doesn't have paints. He doesn't have brush. So what is his brush? What is his paint? What is his canvas? All these things are concepts, actually. That concepts that he is utilizing. So in that case, it is very much similar on the basis of this analogy, that he will utilize three perspectives. But then his perspectives are not like the painter, they are not concrete. They are more conceptual. So what is the perspective of a scientist? It's his worldview. The worldview of the scientist is his perspective. Whatever he looks at and investigates, he will utilize this perspective, his worldview. It will be effective. He cannot get rid of it. This is impossible. Just like in the case of the painter, when he chooses his perspective, suppose we go and we tell him, please, don't stand anywhere. Try to paint without any perspective. Obviously, he will start looking at you. He say, you are crazy. I have to stand. There is no other way. I have to look at the scenery from a certain place. So this is the same for the scientist. The scientist cannot get rid of his worldview when he's doing his scientific activities. And that worldview will determine many things, But that's not it, because now there is a frame. Remember, we said there is a frame that a scientist also develops in his mind. And this is, again, conceptual. This is scientific tradition, which he acquires through his scientific training, through the education. He starts, from the elementary school onwards. He learns, besides his worldview, of course, he acquires his worldview, and then he acquires the concept of knowledge, the concept of science, the concept of method, the concept of truth. What is the significance of truth? Why am I learning the truth? And how am I going to use methodology in acquiring knowledge and so on? So the concept of method, all these things he acquires. All these things together gives in the scientist's mind the way he looks at sciences, but in general. And when we go one step further, that is the outlook. That means these concepts are the ones that he utilizes in his own field. So technical terms that he is utilizing. If he's a chemist, the chemical concepts, whatever he has. Now, when we look at the activities of the scientist in the area of chemistry, obviously they will be determined by his scientific tradition and his worldview. There is no way he can escape from this. It's impossible. Whatever he learned and acquired through his scientific training, and whatever he acquired through his society, the worldview, they will determine his activities in his chemical works. Or a philosopher, again, in his philosophical works. So this, again, is a process that takes place, in our scientific activities. Now, this scientific process is a concept that I try to utilize, with regard to civilizations, that the way it takes place and develops. You remember, I utilized the concept of scientific tradition, for example. Now, this scientific tradition obviously takes place in a long time in a civilization. So this also determines his scientific activities, the way he carries out his scientific activities and the way he expresses his scientific theories and so on and so forth. This is so important that it should be considered, because this is another phenomenon that will affect the way we approach sciences in integrative manner. So the way I explain this is, just imagine a society where there are no, sciences. obviously this will be the pre-scientific times. There are no sciences and individuals with no knowledge activities. How can knowledge activities start in that society? Remember, we are not going to ask the question how scientific activities are starting because there are no sciences. So prior to the emergence of sciences in that society, there must emerge knowledge processes, an accumulation of knowledge activities. I say that, you remember, our epistemology already said that without a worldview, without a perspective, this is not possible. So therefore, a worldview that has the necessary conceptual structure for knowledge activities should emerge in the minds of the individuals within that society. Just think of Islamic civilization. In Mecca, when first revelation came, at that time, there was no knowledge activities that would eventually lead to the emergence of sciences. Now, when I say there are no knowledge activities, a human society necessarily always has knowledge activities. But you see, I do not mean just any kind of knowledge activity. I mean the activity that will lead to the emergence of sciences. So that means every knowledge activity cannot lead to the emergence of sciences and scientific activities. This is not possible. So there is only one specific worldview that will lead to that kind of an emergence. But what kind of a worldview this is? Again, we can give examples from many other civilizations, but it's easy for us to give our example from Islamic civilization. The worldview that will emerge in the mind of those people will have a very strong concept of knowledge in the first place. And there should be an emphasis on knowledge. And then the relationship between the individual and knowledge. And that is obviously, in our case, it is the concept of ilm. And then the emphasis on fiqh again, because fiqh is like, ilm is like revealed knowledge at that time. And fiqh is our understanding, our struggle to acquire knowledge independently also. So these kind of concepts. And of course, the concept, there's encouragement already in the revelation to look in the universe, to understand and to see how things are going. And as you know, many verses referring to the stars, planets, the sun, the moon, the earth, and the mountains, the trees, the date palm, and so on. So all these things are, mainly in the early Islamic worldview that encourages people to learn, to run after knowledge. So only that kind of a worldview. I call this transparent worldview. So this kind of a worldview is transparent. Why? Because the concepts in that worldview are transparent, very clear. Individuals that acquire that knowledge, that kind of a worldview, they are able to explain, who am I? Where am I coming from? Where am I going to? What is the meaning of existence? What is the meaning of life? What am I supposed to do? And so on. So these questions become very clear in the minds of these individuals. And they know their purpose, their program in this life and the after. So this kind of worldview is transparent. So only this kind of worldview is suitable to start knowledge activities. Once knowledge activities starts, the perspective is there, established in the mind of the people. So they look at everything from this perspective. Then what happens? Knowledge activities. And knowledge activities should be, very dynamic, very dynamic. And as a result, this will lead to the emergence of many knowledge, in different areas. This I call accumulation of knowledge. But you see, as you know, at this stage still there are no sciences. The nature of science is systematizing knowledge. Knowledge is not systematic at this time. So accumulation is chaotic. It is not, systematized. When knowledge, that even if it makes no difference how much knowledge accumulates, no matter how big it is, if it is not organized, if it's not systematic, knowledge activities will not lead to the emergence of any new knowledge. So therefore, this is the most critical stage in this knowledge scientific process. So how can the scholars that are active in knowledge activities at that time solve this issue? They do this by classifying knowledge. They begin to classify knowledge. Okay. So what happens? Knowledge is disciplined through classification. I would like you to pay attention to the term I am using, disciplining. You remember each science in the past were called a discipline. Why? Because it is organized, systematic. But prior to that, it is not disciplined. It is chaotic, mixed up. So through this classification, knowledge acquires a disciplinary character. So, knowledge in this area, knowledge in that area. But you see, when you classify knowledge, you notice that each kind of knowledge has a different approach. Namely, you can study each class of knowledge with a certain methodology. One method that is good in one area may not be good in another area. In Islamic case, in Islamic civilization, the classification was based, of course, because Islamic worldview is primarily coming from the revelation. The classification is based on what they perceive in revelation. So it is based on an ontology of ghaib and shahada. So the knowledge that belongs to ghaib has a specific method, and you cannot use that method in the shahada. And when we say shahada, obviously this is the physical universe, and the ghaib is non-physical universe. So these two, and then of course sub branches and so on. So this continued. When this happened, the second frame, remember, in the epistemology we discovered in case of the painter. So the second frame, I would like to refer to this as general scientific conceptual scheme. You remember I mentioned that, at this stage, that scientists acquire through their education, scientific training, they acquire concepts of knowledge, science, theory, truth, method, and what they mean, their significance, and so on. So all these concepts with many other related concepts. We cannot count all of them, of course. They form a scheme in the mind of the individuals. And this is the general. So that means this is the first step into sciences, actually. The first step into sciences. Then what is the next one? The next one, when they begin to name each discipline, each class of knowledge, they name it as a science. So therefore sciences emerge in this way. And then, of course, when they concentrate on each individual science, then the third framework emerges. The third framework is the what I call, remember, this is general, this is specific. Scientific conceptual scheme in the mind of the individual that is specializing in a specific area. So in case of Abu Hanifa, for example, this would be fiqh, and the concepts that are related in fiqh, whatever they may be. So as you can see, the first, you can see this green line covering all the way here is pre-scientific era. and sciences emerge only after this. So this second below, the second one, and third one, this is the scientific era, actually. So science emerged like this, and then this leads to an accumulation, which is the, one we can call scientific tradition. So this is what happened in the past, okay, in many civilizations. But today, this is different. Today, when I tell this to some of our colleagues, they think I am talking about a legend. Why? Because they look at our times and they say, look, science is general, universal, everywhere the same, in Australia, but it is today like this, maybe for the past 100 years or so, about 100 years or so, science, because the world became global, science became global, and perhaps in the future, many things will be global. So science in the global age is different. It has changed and entered into a different era. So therefore, today, when we look at science, we must definitely consider its past history, which I tried to summarize so far, which was in the past, it was more integrative. But today, there is accumulation in each sciences so much that, one scientist or philosopher, cannot learn many things in other sciences. As a result, integration becomes very difficult. But you see, we should develop certain methodology for this kind of an integration. In the past, you take, for instance, Ibn Sina. When did Ibn Sina live? He lived in the 11th century, 10th and 11th century. He died in 1036. So at that time, Ibn Sina was specialized in every single science of his time. For him, this was possible at that time. It was not possible for everyone, though. Many people, take Al-Ghazali, for example, a little bit after him. Al-Ghazali lived also 11th century, right beginning of the 12th century, he died. Al-Ghazali also specialized in many sciences, but maybe not like Ibn Sina. For instance, Ibn Sina was specialized in pharmacology and in medicine also, but Al-Ghazali was not specialized. I am sure he had a lot of knowledge in those sciences also, but he didn't produce books, influential books in those areas like Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina is not like that. So he is exceptional. Of course, he is a gifted person. This is another thing. He was, in any way, he was able to specialize in every science. But today, this is not possible. So therefore, integration will not be the way Ibn Sina tried to do. So our integration will be more conceptual. So we should be content with that. Looking at sciences, more in an abstract way, and conceptually consider them the way I try to explain in this case. And, for instance, when I try to integrate, for example, in physics, quantum physics, I don't need to know quantum physics. If I have general ideas about it, only conceptually, I can integrate it into the general scheme of or system of sciences. So therefore, I don't need to discuss. The other scientists can discuss it, and they can perhaps try to understand that, their science is not discrete, independent just by itself. It is part of the whole being. So this is what we should consider. Another thing is that perhaps, again, you remember I said the scientific process eventually leads to the emergence of a scientific tradition. in the past, again, these scientific traditions were more or less independent. They influenced each other, of course. They benefited from each other because we are human beings. Obviously, they cannot be completely separate, from each other. They took a lot from each other. On the other hand, when you look at their especially perspective and the frame, as far as those mental frameworks are concerned, they were more you'll find more independence in those areas. But in the third one, the specific science, the independence is not so much. So that is required by the nature of each science, actually. For instance, I can cooperate with someone, say, coming from a different perspective. That means his worldview is different and his values are different. The way he looks at life, the way he perceives life and the purpose of life, purpose of existence and so on may be completely different. But in any way, I can still cooperate with him when I am studying quantum physics. Why? Because quantum physics is not stepping out of its limits and going into the interpretation of those things. But as soon as, however, we may express even the same way, our findings, our scientific findings, we may express in the same way, but we may not mean the same things because our perspectives are different. Not only the perspectives, but the frames are also different. In the epistemology, as I tried to explain. So for this reason, this integration is extremely important because if we don't have this holistic approach, then this may lead to materialism and different interpretations of science in our times. And as you know, today, the global scientific tradition really has the perspective very secular, which means, there is no evaluation or interpretation of scientific findings in relation to religion. It is totally, and they say, we don't care about this. We just leave it for you. But you see, in Islamic perspective, we cannot say like that. We cannot say like that. And in fact, when we start asking certain other value-related questions, we will have even more problems. We can say, what is the purpose of studying science? What science gives to humanity? What science gives to me? And how I can benefit from science? And how I can help humanity by utilizing science? When you ask these questions today, in Western, for example, in Western scientific perspective, many scholars, they think that scientists especially, they say, well, these are moral questions, we are not concerned with them. We leave them for other scholars to discuss. Yes, you may do so, but then what you discover may be very much, dangerous for humanity, and it will, prepare the end of humanity at the same time and lead for disasters like the environmental problems and so on, all of these things that we have. So what should we do in that case? In this global scientific tradition, we should consider that we cannot isolate ourselves from this tradition. We have to integrate ourselves with it also. But at the same time, we should try to at least, common values that we have in our perspectives, we can try to share and also infuse our scientific understanding with such values. So for this reason, I was trying to say that maybe it will be better to have this integrative approach. So this is all I would like to say. If you have any questions and comments, you are most welcome. We can discuss it, inshallah.
Ibrahim Hocam, you can ask your question, please.
Hocam, thank you very much for this very brief and concise presentation, which is mind-blowing sometimes, because as there is a lot of discussion in academia about the emergence of a new paradigm of science, a new understanding of sciences, which is different from the 19th and 20th century's perception of science, which is positivistic, materialistic, and also, but its main claim is to be objective and to be the only interpretation of the world. But I have to think to ask first, when you articulate your perception of science, I think about this in the metaphor of being inorganic, organic, and then social sciences, then to integrate them. When I look at, just try to understand you, as I have the impression, although you are very familiar with the process philosophy, perception of Whitehead, because you are not only satisfied what is going on there in outside world, but also what is happening in our mental framework. First, maybe you can say something about that, about the contribution of what process philosophy to this field or to your thinking. The second, this painting, this metaphor, just it was really thought-provoking. If this painter does not paint anything, could we still call him painter or not? And its implications for us, Thank you.
Yes, let me answer the painter question first, because that is a lot easier. I think that will resemble in my case when I tried to explain the scientific process, that at the beginning there is a society in which there is not a worldview in the minds of individuals that is suitable to carry out meaningful knowledge activities that will lead to the emergence of sciences. It's exactly similar to that one. I hope it is clear now. So that means he's not painting. He doesn't know the significance of painting. What is painting? Why should he paint? Why do you require this, and so on? So this is the same, as a society in which there is a worldview not suitable to carry out meaningful knowledge activities. Very much similar to that. And the question with the process philosophy is that Whitehead is one of the most significant philosophers in the 20th century, I believe, because, unfortunately, after the rise of positivist philosophy, there was another reaction against the classical philosophy, because classical philosophy went as if we use Thomas Kuhn's term on the basis of paradigms, but really I don't like this term. I prefer the term system. System philosophies, they used to be active, and each system acted like a paradigm. This is true for scientific activities. But you see, the positivists, they said that systems are impossible. In the past, they were doing this because there was not sufficient accumulation of knowledge in different sciences, so they came against this. It is Whitehead that, for the first time, after Hegel, that claimed that this is not the case. Systems are always possible, but they don't have to be like the way they used to be in the past. Now, the conceptual categorical approach will enable us to come up with new systems, as he tried to do it with the process philosophy. He came up with a specific system. So this is, his contribution, I would say, for modern times. Brother Abdullah, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. How's everything in Chicago?
Alhamdulillah, you can see the sunlight behind me.
Yes.
It is good
Thank
to
you
see
for
you,
inviting
Abdullah.
me. Yes. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, it is early morning now. I have a question about the beginning of civilization. How would you perceive the beginning scientific tradition in the beginning of civilization, not necessarily Islamic civilization, which had a lot of background behind it? That is the question. And the small comment is that this division of knowledge is a, I would say, is a recent phenomenon in terms of world history. I think George Soros, no, what is his name? Sarton.
Yeah, George Sarton.
Sarton, yeah. Sarton has categorically mentioned this, that until late 18th century, theology was part of science, but then theology was divided. So that, and in the 19th century, you see European universities starting with different disciplines. And that is how knowledge became disintegrated, I would say. Compartmentalization of knowledge. So this is the comment, but the question, my question is about the beginning of human civilization. Thank you.
You're welcome. This will be a very long answer, actually. So in order not to take so much time, I will try to answer this as brief as possible, because when we cannot give a general account of all civilizations the way they emerged, we have to go and be specific, start investigating. Say, for example, Greek civilization or Egyptian, from ancient times. From contemporary times, we can go back and start investigating the Western civilization. How did it emerge? How it became a civilization? So this is a very, in general, the explanation would perhaps be the same for all of them. However, the way they took place in history is always different. They cannot be the same anyway. For instance, I will claim this. My claim is that if a society is not able to develop sciences, it cannot turn into a civilization. This will be impossible. But then I know some historians will give me civilizations. They'll say, look at ancient Egyptian civilization or any other kind of civilization in any area. They don't have any sciences the way you are mentioning, very strong scientific tradition, scientific activity, scientific findings. But look, it's a very big and significant civilization. And Mesopotamian civilization also the same. They can give that example. But then that means I need to give different answers for those. Because you see, in those ancient civilizations, knowledge tradition took the place of scientific tradition. So just with this answer, if we combine all of them, then we say that usually the way civilizations take place, obviously there is a cradle of that civilization, namely a center from which it starts. So this is what we are going to establish. So that means every civilization begins at a society, as an individual local culture. And that local culture somehow starts growing and starting to universalize itself. So universalization means the culture is able to accommodate other cultures within its own fold. Take Greek civilization. It started obviously in Ionia. That is what they are saying, probably correct, I don't know. But you see, actually, this is when they say it started in Ionia, they pay attention to the knowledge activities actually. that there were also knowledge people who are running after knowledge, learned personalities. So in any case, it's a local culture. And gradually, it starts to universalize itself. This universalization obviously is based on concepts, on universal concepts. For instance, when there is a local concept that refers to my values, I try to make it, generalize it to accommodate other values within its own fold. So through this kind of an activity, the civilization gradually starts and it grows, into a very big culture, a culture that is able to accommodate other cultures within itself. So as a result, Greek civilization included, Sicily, Anatolia at that time, Asia Minor, Middle East, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, and so on. It covered all those areas. So that is why when you go to Alexandria, for example, you find a library, and in the library there are books that are in Greek only. You go to Palestine, again, libraries, books are in Greek. And wherever, Iran, even in Iran, you go, you find books that are in Greek language. And people are studying in Greek language and Greek science and so on. So it becomes something like this. But there is a problem here that we need to pay attention. Considering the local beginning, the local original society, that is local culture, why does it start universalizing itself? What is the forces that are active in history that pushes that society towards this action? My investigation of civilization is this: it is religion. It is always religion. Religion starts the civilizations. So at the beginning, because religions have universal character also, they try to include others within itself and spread throughout the whole areas. But you see, religion by itself is able to start the process, but it is not able to sustain the process. So there is another factor that sustains this universalization, and this is scientific activities, knowledge activities. So these two together, turns the culture into a civilization. This is a brief explanation I provide.
Can I say something? I'm taking time, but I think you came to the answer to my question at this part, where you bring the issue of religion. Of course, I'm teaching this course, Rise and Fall of Civilization, for a long time, for at least more than 2 decades. And my perception is that all civilizations in history are rooted in divine guidance.
Yes.
And that is what religion is.
Yes.
The problem with religion is that as soon as you can say prophet, or the beginning, in terms of Islamic civilization, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, after he died, it is with the people to interpret it. In early civilizations, after the death of the person who brought Hammurabi, we have clear example of Hammurabi getting revelations. There are pictures, drawings that he is receiving divine guidance. After the death of the prophet, it is corrupted. And here I always quote Rousseau, who said that everything degenerates with man. And in the case of religion, my perception is that the older a religion is, the corrupt it becomes. In Hinduism, these days we have in India, Hindutva, rise of Hindutva. You see, they have introduced the concept of reincarnation, and through that, caste system. To me, caste system is corruption of religion. If you go to Sanatan Dharma in ancient tradition, Indian tradition, there also you don't find this caste divisions. Buddhism came as a reform movement within the Indian culture. Buddhism also propagated equality of human beings, no caste system. The point I'm trying to make is this universal idea of human dignity. The Bible says that God created man in his own image. In Quran, you have the idea that nafakhtu fihi min ruhi. So you have this concept of human being dignified by religion. Now, my question again about the beginning of human history, when there was nothing, and I think I mentioned this question before as well, when religion is saying that human society began with one couple, and it includes all religion. I mean, maybe in Hinduism, those couples have been made gods, but fundamentally religion believes in one origin of humanity. But we have this now, I mean, we should not underestimate evolution, but anthropology as a discipline has introduced this idea that humanity began with one species becoming another species through a natural process. Now, there is a contradiction in terms here that when one species become another species, the one stage could not have been evolution. It has to be a revolution. With this, they interpret that humanity began with a group of people. And of course, with that, Hobbesian theory of man in nature fits quite well. So these are the problems that I encounter when I talk about earliest human civilization. Sorry for taking too long, but this is how I feel about this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is a very good explanation also. That is why I said that, you know, the religion starts the process, but it cannot sustain it. It's because humans are, as you said, you know, very swift corrupting the religion.
Yeah.
So this is the way it took place in history. And this is the place it takes in our times also.
Yeah.
So this was a very good explanation. However, there are, you know, we need other explanations also, but that's not the case, you know, in this, since we are concerned more with philosophy of science, I will not, that's why I try to not to go into that area. So I stopped here. Yes, Hussein has a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Alparslan Hocam. This is a very good scheme to understand the epistemology of sciences in general. And I really like this explanation of yours. I wonder whether universal moral values and ethics are possible, and how could you evaluate the power dynamics in knowledge production in general? Is it enough, or should I elaborate more?
Yeah. Let me answer the first question very briefly. You know, universal system of moral values is not possible. However, universal moral values are possible. Namely, as a system may not, you know, and we cannot force our value system upon others. But however, there are some values that are common among all human beings. So therefore, those should be universal, definitely. And that can be integrated into our scientific conception and so on, and so forth. So what was the second question?
The the role of the power dynamics in knowledge production.
Yeah, the power dynamics, that is really very important. again, this is another thing. You know, I had another slide. I thought if I brought that slide, it would take too much time.
Okay,
you know,
it was missing in the general scheme. So
yeah,
that explains.
yeah. So the general thing is that, you know, the society needs certain dynamism to sustain these activities. And that dynamism comes, number one, of course, from the worldview itself, but number two, with moral values, especially. So morality plays a very significant role in this case. And I usually say this, whether some people will agree with me or not, I say that morality is the spirit of science. No science is possible without morality. There is some kind of morality that therefore it is needed. That is the main dynamic over there. This does not mean that there are not other dynamic forces. There are, but those are, you know, probably not effective at whole scale like this. Usually in my explanations, you know, I have in my mind the early Islamic civilization.
I see.
You know, when Islam started, what kind of dynamics it gave to the individuals and how it pushed them forward. And this is perhaps moral sensitivity, because this is very important. That is the highest one. And the second one, intellectual sensitivity, namely, you know, aspiration for learning and running after learning. Usually, Dr. Ibrahim, he has this word he always say, burning for learning. This that is, you know, also very much important. But the one that is really needed is the one that is that moral sensitivity.
Okay, I'm asking this because you mentioned that, let me find this. There is the dominance of the secular epistemology in the general sciences across the world is because of these power dynamics still working on throughout the globe. It's because this Western secular epistemology still dominates the public sphere across the globe. But actually, there is no consensus on the on the way of interpreting metaphysical dynamics going on in nature. And some philosophers prefer to explain it with secular terms. Some others were religious people, but in the end, the secular camp won the battle and dominated the world, especially with the imperial forces colonizing, you know, all the rest of the world, and the process still goes on. I mean, there is no equal forces, you know, raising their voices in the public sphere, saying that we can interpret certain events in this way, but you know, you can also interpret the same facts in your own way in secular terms, but these are not equal in terms of power. This is what I mean.
Yes, yes. Usually, those who are more successful in science, they dominate. And therefore, they impose their values also on others. So Muslims, unfortunately, they are not so much influential in knowledge production today. So as a result, it's almost impossible for them to infuse their values into scientific activities today. This is not possible. So if you want really to be effective, you have to be, you know, very lively, dynamic, and more production. So then you will be able to infuse some of at least, because there is also, you know, our worldview is different. Muslims do not really impose their values upon others. This is not in our worldview. It is not. We just, you know, the way we do, if people are affected by that, they take it. This is the way it took place in history. So in any way, this is actually more effective than the other one. Imposing your value is not really that good. So Brother Abdul Majid, Prof. Abdul Majid, please go ahead. I am going according to the, you know, order that the hands are.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Oh, I have a small comment, and this is maybe an alternative or something we have already discussed. The first point is that you were tracing the development of human civilizations and how knowledge activities started, and science as a term means something of systematization of knowledge. And we have to just differentiate and between the specific use of this term post-Renaissance. Post-Renaissance, as you have been well saying, and this is this is my study as well, depending on what we have seen about the people who have written about philosophy of science and others, that this is the only civilization in human history, if it can be called a civilization, which is not rooted in transcendence. Western civilization and Western science, people have been doing, you were talking of the people who have written history of science and others. And this is the post-Renaissance development of Western science. This is the only science which is not rooted that way in religion, or which cuts its connection with transcendence. Now, for real integration, that basic, if we are uncomfortable with the use of paradigm, but we can just say basic epistemological correction and modification is needed, where whole scientific activity is committed to the corporeal level of the physical being, that too quantifiable, and then the rest of the levels of being which are left untouched. So there is not only the science is growing, it has reached a point of crisis, a point of civilizational crisis as well. And there cannot be a correction within the paradigm of so-called scientific philosophy. It needs some correction from other sources. And what are the other sources? That is the integrative approach, which comes into being only when taking into cognizance the other levels of the being and other ways of accessing and depending on the knowledge. Suppose not intellectual activity reduced to rationalism only, but to intellection, to the higher levels where rational the faculty is used, but higher levels intuitive knowledge is used, revelation is used, then only a real integration in scientific, that is a level, a limited portion which is very effective, which is power gearing, but only getting ourselves into that very paradigm will not make us very strong and give a real alternative to the world. There is some basic correction needed, and that basic correction puts us in a way in the vanguard of human activity, where there is a place for rational faculty, there is a place for our senses, there is a place for our intellection, there is a place for intuition, there is a place for revelation. And that takes into consideration the corporeal level, the subtle levels, and the higher levels of being as well. This is my submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this is very good explanation also. I agree with you. And now, Dr. Yunus Hocam, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It was a fine presentation, very concise, to the point, and very clear. So thank you very much for the contribution there. At the beginning, you went through the classification of science, the social sciences, physical sciences, life sciences, whatever. I think it is very consistent with the current classification of our science. You use other different names, but some of them basically the same classification there. And you also gave us some brief history. The way I see on the historical side, in the past, science, philosophy, religion, they were really the same. That is no difference. Religion was almost everything. It swallowed everything. That is, everything made sense within the religious context, whether it is Islamic or in Christianity. And the regular sciences. Before really 1500s or 1600s, they were not developed much other than maybe astronomy. I think we had, good development on some mathematics, which is the language of sciences, and astronomy. I think good developments there. Other than that, not much significant. And after the 1500s, I think we see the sciences really developing its own methodology and kind of establishing as a branch. But even that time, it wasn't called science, it was philosophy. For example, Newton named his book, philosophy, or not science. And science basically means knowledge there. But nowadays, in the 19th and 20th century, they acquired their specialized meaning. Right now, we know what philosophy is, what religion is, the sciences. I think they have their own places with their, I think, distinct meaning there. Now, you mentioned about the world views, world opinions, that they are always mixed. You cannot separate them. In the mind, it is certainly the case. That is, there is nobody in the world without a world view, because we view the world, and behind the glasses, we have our own values, our own assumptions, beliefs, whatever. That is, there is no person in the world without a worldview, and there is no person in the world when he talks about, let's say, his branch or whatever specialty, that he doesn't reflect his beliefs. Now, if let's say we take the practice of science, science is supposed to be free of opinions, because it is objective, because there is only one science. Nursi, calls it what Shariat Tekviniya, or the laws of creation, or Sunnatullah, Adatullah. That is, there is really one science. So for the entire humanity, what they are doing is they are discovering that one science, regardless of their worldviews. And the expectation is that you simply express what you see objectively. That is based on observations, measurements, whatever, and you don't interpret it. Kind of put it there and leave it for interpretation. Of course, people will interpret it, even scientists. Once you do that, you kind of, you philosophize on that one. That is, you do philosophy, you attach meaning to it, which is fine, except they are under different covers. It is no longer science, it is a philosophy in a sense. Therefore, in my view, you can, let's say, do science objectively without involving worldviews, when, let's say, you simply limit yourself to the objective part based on observation and experimentation, and simply express it that way. Is it this way in practice? I would say it is mostly that way, except biology. You cannot detect any worldview in, let's say, physics, chemistry, whatever. When it comes to life sciences, then I think we have a lot of presuppositions there, and the materialistic philosophy dominates. That is, since most scientists, especially in life sciences, they have this materialistic worldview, which is also very weak, because they cannot defend it. They cannot explain a lot of things. They are very defensive, and they are very kind of edgy on that thing there. It is visible, but we in the scientific community, we kind of, really criticize them a lot. And many of us call the life scientists not even scientists, because they have a lot of presuppositions. That is, they use their worldviews also to some extent. But again, this is the minority of the entire sciences. And you suggested also that because of the worldview involvement, we should have, like, maybe different civilizations will have different scientific traditions. I will question the validity of it, and I'll ask you to comment on that one, especially using, let's say, the coronavirus, the COVID-19 as an example. Okay, in my view, I think there is, one science, and there is ideological involvement, especially materialistic worldview in life sciences. But I think we can deal with that, because most people separate science with scientism, which is materialism, although some mix it. So we need to work on that one. But I contend that all the believers or non-believers can work on the same scientific project. They can make the science grow together. They can do their publications, and we cannot tell their worldview simply by reading their articles. In fact, on the same article, we will have, let's say, Muslims, Hindus, I don't know, atheists, whatever. You cannot even tell the difference. Two questions. Number one, is there anything wrong with that? That is to limit scientific writings to the, let's say, just the objective part based on what is observed and what is experimented, and without, let's say, ideological interpretations to publish it, which is the norm usually, so that, you know, the writers can be of any conviction, which is actually the norm nowadays. And is there a, let's say, need for division, like, you know, Islamic science, Western science, or whatever? And as an example, can you use, let's say, we are familiar with now the COVID publications. The entire world, a lot of researchers from all over the world, they do research on COVID, scientific findings, publications, whatever. When you look at the COVID-19, I think from, let's say, the description of it to the vaccines developed, the shots, whatever. Do you think, and there is only one science on that one right now, do you think that we should have had, let's say, an Islamic science on virus versus the Western science, like, you know, kind of work separately, or is the current practice is just fine? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent contribution, actually, this explanation. And I will try to give my answer for this. Today, of course, there is only one science because it is global. Although there is only one science, but you see, there are certain, Dr. Abdullah, he gave a very good example that George Sarton said that, you know, theology and perhaps some other sciences that are related to religion were excluded after the 20th century from the main body of the sciences, and therefore the integration was lost. When we consider this, then even today this would be perhaps valid. For instance, fiqh in Islamic scientific tradition in the West, they wouldn't consider it as a science. In Western tradition, they wouldn't accept it. In any other civilization, they don't have this. Fiqh is a specific science that belongs to Islamic civilization only. So there are such, you know, issues like that. And of course, there may be some others also. For instance, take Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun, he invented the science of Umran. Now, today, of course, social scientists, especially in the West, they interpret that as a philosophy of history. Some say that this is actually he is the one who established sociology as a specific science by this. But you see, nobody calls these studies with the name that he gave for this science. So as a result, it is possible that you may have science, a certain science in one civilization. Some others may not have that science in other civilizations. I can even give more examples. You know, take this is more in social areas. You know, the social and human and religious studies. You know, for instance, in philosophy, this is my claim. Unfortunately, this is not the way it takes place. You know, Muslim societies cannot have a science called philosophy of religion. There cannot be philosophy of religion. But in the West, they have it. And then they think Muslims are confused, of course, their mind, you know, totally confused. And they think, well, this is a science, so therefore we should study. And then in some universities, I don't know if all universities or not, they start, you know, putting a special discipline, which is called philosophy of science. How can you philosophize over a religion? This is not possible. In Islamic case, I mean, it's not possible. In secular case, it is possible. You can, because, you know, they think about religion the way they want to, and therefore they philosophize over it. But so as a result, in this global age, the problems are very different. They appear to us completely different. In the past, it was not like that. I can give specific examples. Now, even so, of course, scientific traditions, they had many differences in the past. But besides that, those differences, they were still able to cooperate with each other. Let me give you this analogy again, a metaphor. For instance, you know, every civilization or every culture, they have their own culinary culture. We have our own kitchen. You know, someone coming from another culture, when they come to us and they see the cooking things, the way we cook, a lot of things are different. Now, although they are different, it doesn't mean that we cannot cooperate on cooking. We can teach them, you know, how to cook imam bayıldı. They probably don't know what it means, but when we explain and teach them, and then we can cooperate, and they can tell us about their cooking also, and we can learn these things. So as a result, cooperation is possible, but to some extent, because now they are in the West, they come to Istanbul, and they tell me, okay, I'm going to tell you how to make pork chops. Am I going to cooperate with him on pork chops, how to cook and start eating it? So that means there are limits. This is the same in sciences also, in values. I will give you one example here. This is very interesting, actually. Let's look at this. So in Islamic civilization, when they reached, you know, its full growth, the principles of every science is given like this. There are 10 principles. Some of these principles are the same in Western civilization, in Western scientific tradition. Now, this is, by the way, in the 18th century, Muslims expressed it like this. Every science must have these principles. Otherwise, they didn't consider it to be a science. What are they? The science must have a definition. It must have a subject matter. It must have an accumulation of knowledge. And we should know its merit. It should be beneficial for us. And its relationship to other sciences must be known. And who is the founder of that science? And what is its sources? And the legal ruling. This legal ruling will not be accepted in the West. Impossible, even today, because it is expressed in Arabic as hukm sharia. Namely, Muslims consider whether it is permissible to study that science or not. You see, this is a value. Today, they will not accept this. And it's the scope of the science and the name. A science must have a name. Without a name, it is not considered to be a science. So when you consider this, you see, this is the way Muslims defined it. But at that time, in the West, they wouldn't accept some of these. And even today, they wouldn't accept it. So therefore, there were differences. Although there were differences, it doesn't mean that we couldn't cooperate with them. We could. I am sure this is possible. Even today, it is possible, although our perspectives are different. Why it is possible? Because the area we are cooperating is very specific. It's not general. You know, that is, we cannot cooperate on worldview. We cannot tell them, come, I will teach you my worldview. They will run away. They say, no, I'm not Muslim. I don't want to learn your worldview. So because worldview is very general, it includes many other values, concepts, beliefs, you know, and so on. But in chemistry doesn't include those things. But then you see, when you come to human sciences, you enter into the area of values again. We can share, cooperate to some extent, but not, you know, there are limits, in other words. So today, I think we should consider all these things. I hope it is clear. You know, I can explain this much.
Yeah, I also asked about the coronavirus. That is, how do you evaluate the current practice? The whole world having, let's say, only one solution, and for the last 2 years, the way, let's say, the scientific knowledges are developed. And one comment on your answer. I think we need to agree on the definition of science, because let's say certain worldviews are different, but worldviews are not science. And then fiqh nowadays is not a science. Let's say moral values, whatever. It is not today, you know, are they invalid? No, they are as valid, maybe more valid, but they are considered under, you know, philosophy, humanities, or whatever. And on those things, different cultures are different anyway. So, you know, it is just normal. I think science, if you limit it to Shariat Tekviniya, as you know, I am expressing, then probably we wouldn't have much difference there.
Yes,
And
no
coronavirus
problem.
example, I think may be explained. If you can give us your view on that one, I think it may also answer that concern.
Yes, again, coronavirus, obviously, this is, you know, a specific issue. Therefore, cooperation is possible. No values are involved in it, you know, unless for protection, you know, that, you know, for instance, I was surprised. The other day I met a Chinese. He said, you know, still today, all Chinese ports or borders are closed. No one can enter, no one can come out. Even they don't allow Chinese to enter. They cannot go because they stopped coronavirus there and they want infection from outside. So, well, that is their decision. They can do that. But in Turkey, we don't do it, obviously. Everything is open. People can come and go and so on. So as a result, their approach is different. However, the solutions, I mean scientific solutions that we offer for coronavirus will not be very much different, you know, except, yeah, of course, you know, this conspiracy theories and so on, unfortunately, so much widespread. I don't believe in that, but people spread this, and then it causes certain, but that's not science, as you said, and worldview is not science either, but it dominates the science, our scientific activities. It dominates. It is, you know, it is like, I usually give this example. You know, in computers, as you know, we have Windows program. But you see, Windows program is the general program that runs the computer. When we want to type something, you need Word program, Microsoft, in other words. Now, if somebody says, no, I just want to use Windows, I don't want to use Microsoft, how are you going to type? You cannot. But when you start typing, you say, please erase Windows. You cannot erase, because if you take out Windows, the Microsoft will not work. They work together. It's like that, you know, our mind has programs like this. They work with each other. They are integrated. That is the epistemology of human mind, actually. They work. So worldview is like that. You cannot say that a scientist is not utilizing his worldview when he's doing chemistry, when he's doing activities to find solutions for coronavirus. He is utilizing his worldview. It is in the behind working. You cannot throw it away. And it determines your activities. You are not aware of it. So that is what I meant, really. So I'm not saying that worldview is a science. Obviously, it is not. Everybody knows that. Even the second category is not a science. You know, the second frame that I said, that we utilize, the general scientific conceptual scheme, itself is not science. It is the program that runs our scientific activities, in other words. So the science is more when you enter into these specific areas. However, we should be aware of the things that are going on in behind, because those determine our activities in our specific area. That is what I tried to say. This is essential for integration.
Okay, thank you, Hocam.
Yes, Necati Hocam, buyur.
Okay. Yeah, it's always great to really get such overviews and also talk after Yunus Hocam, right? So I think that when I reflect on this subject, I agree with Yunus Hocam in a sense that, you know, you cannot talk about, let's say, Islamic science of, you know, the coronavirus. Okay, so in a sense that, yes, there are different approach, but we are looking in terms of evolution. So if you, as soon as you accept that there is a virus causing the corona, then the way you're going to study, the way you're going to do in terms of, let's say, work will be quite similar, unless you have different views and say, no, there's not really virus, there's something else causing that. Then they might give you or direct you toward a different solution. So I think what here is that I think we are somehow we are not aware of how the science is limiting us, because the limit of modern science is extremely useful for us. So it's kind of blinding us to see its limitation. So what I mean is this, is basically what I think Nursi was praising, is that the modern science is based on empiricism. It's based on the assumption that you make the worldview that everything's made of matters and everything should be studied through observation. And when you make observation and then you analyze, let's say, your data and test your hypothesis, then now you induce certain ideas and you come up with theory, and as long as you have more, scientific or similar studies affirm the same thing, then boom, you now have a theory on a particular area that become a discipline. So now, but I think the problem here, so do we have any problem with such approach? I don't think so. So is it helpful? I think it's extremely helpful. Most of the things that we enjoy this time is the product of this empirical approach to the matters, to the universe. And as a result, we get the cars, we get the airplane, we get the computers, or we get those tall buildings. That's no objection. We're all enjoying that. The problem here is, and I think when then now you say this has been proven extremely helpful, then now we have to really naturalize every kind of knowledge, make everything to be like in this case, empirical knowledge, to the level, if we really carefully listen to what Nursi was mentioned, to say science is objective. Objective meaning that science is free from the perspective of the scientist, which means that, if you're really looking at reliable knowledge, but actually the very that your understanding of the knowledge is object, is matter, that you're taking the matter as the essence, and you don't really recognize any other things as let's say, as the domain of the inquiry, domain of knowledge. That's, I think, the limitation of knowledge. So the problem, I think, that this is not us alone, and I think it's one of my favorite scholar on that one is Admiral Husserl. His main point that he came from mathematics, and he became aware of this narrow approach in scientific method, mainly empiricism, that thinking that everything can be known through empirical evidence, and then thinking that everything just has to be similar to what we really observe in matters. So, and then trying to ignore other side of the creation, like let's say, particularly when it comes to human science, consciousness, that's let's say you have a concept of nafs doesn't exist in science. Concept of soul doesn't exist. You cannot even talk about it. So in a sense, if you still talk about it, do we have a soul, a science? What is that? Are you okay? How can you talk about? So in a sense, to me, that I think the problem, the success of science, the empiricism really helpful in terms of getting instrumental knowledge to study the matter, to get us the tools. But meanwhile, if we narrow ourselves to this empirical approach of modern science, then we end up ignoring all other domains of existence, particularly when it comes to human sciences. Because again, so to me, it's like this, is like, let's say, if you only say everything is atoms, there's nothing else. Or if you only say everything is molecule, there's nothing else. If you say there's only cells, nothing else. Now, yes, there are atoms, there are molecules, there are cells, but there are more than that. So I think the modern science is just telling us there are matters and there's a relationship and laws that governing the matters and nothing else. And that you need to limit your approach and understanding to this. And so what is consciousness? We cannot even ask about it. What is the soul? This is just ghost that basically inserted into the human mind through religion. So I think that's the things that are limiting us. And I think when I see it has been over 100 years that in the West, they recognize some prominent scholars recognize this limitation, and they try to see how they can go beyond this limitation. And I think we as Muslim world, we are still we are behind. We don't really understand because we are very much behind in science, so we don't understand the limitation of science. And since we are behind, we think that, you know, if we somehow say anything against this empiricism or materialism, then we're going to be somehow, you know, belittled. So therefore, we just stay quiet. So I wonder what you want to say on this, Alparslan Hocam.
Well, I more or less I agree with you. So it is not a big problem for me.
Meanwhile, there was, were you able to look at the chat box?
Frozen or?
Alparslan Hocam, were you able to look at the chat box? There was some comment or question there as well. Or do you want me to look at it for you? Alparslan Hocam, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think there are one or two comments in the chat box. Would you like to go through that as well?
I am trying to go through. Let me see, because it's difficult to. There are so many things, but most of them are not.
Toward the end, there's one about neurotheology and about neuroevolution in neurotheology, it says. So it says, how would you reconcile those two? There's one question on that one. So in a sense that, because since you talk about integration, so the question is about like when there's certain issues that you think you can really, it seems like it might be hard to integrate. What would you do that? I think that's the question. I got it, if I understood correctly.
Let me see. Actually, I didn't know if a question of this sort would come. I had one. Just 1 second. I had one slide. I didn't show you that slide. It's just to give you an idea. I cannot go into that because this is involved more into the classification of sciences. You know, that is totally something different, really. Let me see if I can find again. Just share with you my table. It should give you an idea. That is how I would try to integrate. So that means we can add definitely on this table. I don't know if you are able to see this or not. I put the full screen. So the classification of science, as you can see, it can go through the classification of being, the way you classify being. And obviously, in each class of being, there is a knowledge that corresponds. And based on that knowledge, you continue like this, from the ghaib to the shahada. And when you come, obviously, neurotheology will be somewhere around these sciences. So it can be integrated, you know, into the sciences. But we have to be careful because, you know, in Islamic scientific tradition, the ontology is based on the ghaib shahada, namely physical, non-physical realms. So then you need to decide, you know, when you want to integrate the science, you have to decide where it falls, in which area. So as soon as you say theology, it falls obviously into ghaib. But when you say neurology, it falls into Shahada. So that means it is somewhere in between here. So, we need to discuss this in detail, exactly how it can be integrated and so on. So there are some new sciences, but as I said, some of the sciences that are invented in the West, we don't really have to accept them as science. We don't have to. Just now, as you noticed, Yunus Hoca said that fiqh is not a science, because when you look from the Western perspective, it will appear to you like that. It depends on your perspective, because fiqh was considered in Islamic civilization always one of the highest sciences, one of the most significant sciences, in fact. And again, the example I gave you is Ibn Khaldun's science of Umran. Nobody is studying Umran today as a science, in other words. But if you say this is, how come this is science of civilizations, it doesn't mean that we are not studying civilizations. But when we study civilizations, we study it as sociology, given a different name. So therefore, each new science that will emerge in the future also, we need to consider. We need to consider from which perspective we can consider it as a science, and which area of being it is addressing. And then how, on the basis of that, it can be integrated into the system of whole sciences.
There's another question in chat box. I'll post on the very last one, if you can answer that.
Okay, what do you think about some of today's schools who are interested to talk about religion based on their expertise point of view, namely science of Ma'rifatullah and Alamul Ghaib? There are scholars in modern sciences. I think here, again, Ma'rifatullah falls into the area of Ghaib. Now, in the true sense, if you noticed the classification I gave, those are not sciences, actually. They are not sciences. They are, knowledge which we acquire through the revelation, whatever we learn from revelation. Maybe I should show, let me see if I have, again, I can show you my, okay, this is the table I gave you. As you can see here, what corresponds to being as ontology, epistemology is knowledge. I don't call it a science. And then the Aqidah, again, revealed knowledge. I don't say science. Again, here again, philosophy. So that means we are able to philosophize on certain things that come actually from the Aqidah. So, and then philosophy of man, human, see, these are all different. In one sense, these cannot be considered. It is part of the general system of science, of course. But in the specific sense, they are not considered science like the sciences in the Shahada. So these are, in the true sense, they are the sciences that we are more active. But here, they are also related to revelation. So as a result, they should be considered from, as you can see, I put Ma'rifatullah here in the Aqidah part. So it is considered more or less like that. So actually, we need to discuss this in more detail, but that, as I said, this is a different subject to discuss. So I didn't want to go into that. It will take too much time. I hope it is clear now. I guess we are finished, right?
I think so. It's almost 6 p.m. Istanbul time. I think we can end it here if there's no other question or comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. for your participation, and we'll see you inshallah next month again in another webinar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.
Assalam wa
Thank you.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor. Jazakumullah khairan.
Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you very much. This was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.